For almost 25 years, my daughter had been the person who made my house feel like home. Even after she grew up and moved into her own apartment, I still had the habit of expecting her. I would sometimes cook too much food because I was used to having her at the table. I would buy things she liked at the grocery store without thinking. And whenever I heard a car stop outside in the evening, a small part of me would wonder if she had decided to visit without telling me. Her name is Claire. She was 31 when I first noticed that something had changed. It was not dramatic. That was what made it difficult too. Understand. Claire did not have a fight with me. She did not announce that she needed distance. She simply started coming home less often. At first, I thought it was normal. She had a demanding job, new responsibilities, and her own life. I told myself that adults did not have time to visit their mothers every weekend. Then the weekends became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became almost a month. And eventually, I realized that I had not seen my daughter in person for nearly 7 weeks. We still exchanged messages from time to time, but even those became shorter. I tried not to take it personally. I reminded myself that people change. Children grow up. Mothers have to learn when to step back. But something about Claire's silence felt different. It was not the silence of someone who was simply busy. It felt like she was carefully choosing what not to tell me. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean the spare bedroom. Claire had never completely emptied that room after moving out. There were still a few boxes of her old things, some books, childhood photographs, and clothes she had promised to collect one day. I had avoided touching most of it because the room felt like a small museum of her childhood. That morning, however, I opened the first box. Inside were school notebooks, old birthday cards, a small stuffed animal, and several photographs. I smiled as I looked through them. There was Claire at 8 years old, standing in front of our first apartment. There was Claire at 16, holding a cake she had decorated herself. There was a photograph of the two of us at the beach when she was 19. I remembered that day clearly. She had been unhappy about something, although she never told me what it was. I placed the photograph aside and continued sorting through the box. Then I found an envelope. It was plain white, slightly yellowed with H. There was no stamp. No address, just Claire's name written across the front. I immediately assumed it was something from school or perhaps an old birthday card, but when I turned it over, I noticed that it had never been opened. I hesitated before touching it. There was something strange about seeing my daughter's name written on an unopened envelope inside a box she had kept for years. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Claire standing beside a woman I did not recognize. The photograph looked old, probably more than 10 years old. Claire looked about 20. The woman beside her was perhaps in her late 40s. They were standing outside a small cafe, smiling at the camera. I stared at the woman for several seconds. I had never seen her before, but there was something about her face that felt strangely familiar. I turned the photograph over. On the back was a date. It was from 12 years earlier, and underneath the date were 4 words written in Claire's handwriting. She knows everything now. I read the sentence again, then again. I had no idea who she was, and I had no idea what Claire meant by everything. For the first time, I wondered whether my daughter had been keeping something from me for years. I put the photograph back into the envelope and closed it. I told myself there was probably a perfectly ordinary explanation. Maybe the woman was a former teacher. Maybe she was someone Claire had worked with. Maybe the sentence meant something completely unrelated to our family. I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. That afternoon, I started remembering small things from the past, things I had never considered important. There had been a period when Claire was about 19 or 20 when she suddenly became very private. She stopped talking about certain parts of her life. Whenever I asked about her plans, she would give me vague answers. At the time, I thought it was simply part of growing up. Now I wondered whether I had missed something. The following Monday, I called Claire, she answered, but I could immediately tell that she was distracted. I did not mention the photograph. I did not want to sound suspicious. Instead, I simply asked how she was doing. She told me she was fine. That was all. The conversation ended quickly. Afterward, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I looked at the photograph again. There was no reason for me to be frightened. There was no obvious danger. Still, I had the uncomfortable feeling that I had accidentally opened a door that had been closed for years. 3 days later, Claire came to the house. It was unexpected. She had not told me she was coming. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open. When I saw her, I immediately noticed how tired she looked. She had lost weight. Her face looked pale, and there were dark circles beneath her eyes. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but something stopped me. Instead, I watched her put her bag down and walk toward the spare bedroom. That was unusual. Claire normally went straight to the kitchen or sat in the living room. This time, she went directly to the room where I had found the photograph. I followed her a few moments later. She was standing beside the old boxes. Her expression changed when she saw the envelope on top. I knew immediately that she had recognized it. She picked it up. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she put it back. That was when I realized something important. Claire had not forgotten about the photograph. She had been hoping I would never find it. I did not confront her. I could see that whatever was behind that photograph was something she was not ready to explain. Instead, I watched as she gathered a few old things from the room before leaving. She looked around the bedroom for a long moment. It was the same room where she had slept as a teenager. The same walls. The same window. The same wooden shelf where I had kept her childhood books. But she looked at it as if she were seeing it for the first time after she left. I returned to the box. I searched through everything again. This time, I noticed something I had completely missed before. At the bottom of the box was a small notebook. It had no title. Its pages were filled with Claire's handwriting. Most of it was ordinary. Notes about school. Lists of things she wanted to buy. Small reminders. But toward the middle of the notebook, the entries became different. There were several pages that had been torn out, and on the first remaining page, there was one sentence. Mom still doesn't know. I stopped, breathing for a moment. I read it again. Then I turned the page. There was another sentence. I thought I could protect her by keeping the truth to myself. I sat on the floor with the notebook in my hands. For years, I had believed that I knew my daughter. I knew her favorite foods. I knew what made her laugh. I knew what she was like when she was nervous. I knew the little habits she had carried since childhood. But suddenly, I wondered whether knowing someone for 31 years meant that you truly knew everything about them. I turned another page, and there, written in Claire's handwriting, was the first clue about what had happened 12 years earlier. It was only one sentence, but it changed everything. That was the day I found out who my mother really was. I stared at those words until my eyes began to hurt, because there was only one problem. I was Claire's mother, and I had no idea what she meant. I could not stop thinking about the sentence in Claire's notebook. That was the day I found out who my mother really was. I read it so many times that the words almost stopped making sense. There was only one explanation I could think of. Claire had discovered something about me, something from my past, something I had never told her, but I could not understand what it could possibly be. I had never lived a secret life. At least, not one I knew about. I grew up in a small town. I married young, had Claire worked for most of my adult life, and spent years trying to give my daughter a stable childhood. There had been difficult periods, of course, but there was nothing in my past that I believed could completely change the way Claire saw me. Still, the notebook suggested otherwise. The next morning, I searched through the old documents I kept in a cabinet in my bedroom. Birth certificates, school records, old insurance papers, family photographs. I found Claire's birth certificate and stared at it for several minutes. Everything appeared normal. My name was listed as her mother. Her father's name was there as well. There was nothing unusual. I almost convinced myself that I had misunderstood the notebook. Then I remembered the photograph, the unknown woman, the date, the words on the back. She knows everything now. I began wondering whether the woman was connected to Claire's discovery. I decided to search through the old photographs again for almost 2 hours. I looked through albums from Claire's childhood. Then I found something strange. The same woman from the photograph appeared in another picture. It was taken at Claire's 10th birthday party. She was standing in the background, partially hidden behind several guests. I had never noticed her before, but now that I knew what I was looking for, I could not stop seeing her. I found her in another photograph from a family picnic, then another. She had been present at several important moments in Claire's childhood, and I had no memory of her. That frightened me more than anything else. I called my older sister, Margaret. She was the only person in our family who might remember someone I had forgotten. I sent her a photograph of the woman. Her response came several minutes later. She knew who she was. Her name was Evelyn, and according to Margaret, Evelyn had known our family for a very long time. But there was something else. Margaret told me that Evelyn had once been a close friend of our mother. Our mother. My stomach tightened. Our mother had died when I was young. I barely remembered her. Most of my memories came from photographs and the stories Margaret occasionally told me. I asked why I had never heard Evelyn's name. Margaret explained that after our mother died, Evelyn disappeared from our lives. Apparently, there had been an argument between them shortly before my mother's death. I had been too young to understand it. Margaret had always assumed it was something personal between two adults. Now I wondered whether it had been something much bigger. I spent the rest of the day searching through old family belongings. Eventually, I found a small wooden box that had belonged to my mother. I had not opened it in years. Inside were several letters, a few pieces of jewelry, and an old photograph. The photograph showed my mother standing beside Evelyn. They looked incredibly close. On the back was a date, the same year I was born. My hands began to shake. I looked through the letters. Most were ordinary, but one letter was different. It had never been sent. It was written by Evelyn, and it mentioned me. Not Claire. Me. The letter explained that Evelyn had discovered something about my birth, something that my mother had desperately wanted to keep hidden. I could barely continue reading. According to the letter, there had been complications when I was born. My mother had been unable to care for me for several months. During that period, another woman had helped raise me. Evelyn. But that was not the shocking part. The shocking part was that Evelyn believed I had been given a different identity before eventually being returned to my mother. The details were confusing. There were names I did not recognize, dates that did not seem to match, and one sentence that made my entire body go cold. Evelyn had written that she believed I was not biologically related to the woman I had always called my mother. I stopped reading. I could not breathe properly for my entire life. I had believed that my childhood memories were incomplete because I had been young. Now I wondered whether they were incomplete because someone had deliberately hidden the truth. I immediately thought about Claire. If she had discovered this, then everything suddenly made sense. She had not been avoiding me because she was angry. She had been avoiding me because she did not know how to tell me that she had discovered something that could destroy the story I had believed about my own life. I returned to Claire's notebook. The entries after the one I had already read became more personal. She had written about finding an old photograph. She had written about meeting Evelyn. And then she had written about discovering that Evelyn had been looking for me for years. I could hardly believe it. My daughter had found a person from my forgotten past. A person I had never known was still connected to my life. But there was one thing I still could not understand. Why had Claire stopped coming home if she had discovered the truth about my childhood? Why was she keeping her distance from me? Then I found another entry. It was written only a few months earlier. Claire had described meeting Evelyn again. She had also written that Evelyn had given her a sealed envelope. The envelope contained something Claire had been afraid to show me. I searched the notebook for more information. There was nothing. The next pages had been torn out. I felt frustrated and frightened. Then I remembered the photograph Claire had taken from the box when she visited. She had carried it away with her. That meant the photograph was important. I needed to know what was written on the back. I began searching through the house for anything connected to Evelyn. Old phone books, family albums, letters, receipts, anything. Near midnight, I finally found an old address written on the back of one of my mother's photographs. It belonged to a small house on the edge of town. I recognized the street. Evelyn had lived there. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I drove there. The house looked abandoned. The garden was overgrown, and several windows were covered from the inside. I stood outside for several minutes before approaching the front door. There was an envelope taped beneath the door handle. My name was written on it. Not Claire, single quotes s. Mine. I knew immediately that this was not a coincidence. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It contained only one sentence. Your daughter is trying to protect you from the truth because she believes you will not survive knowing it. I read it again. Then I looked at the house. For the first time, I understood that Claire's distance had never been about wanting to leave me. She had been trying to protect me, but from what? I turned the paper over. There was one final line. Ask your sister what happened the night your mother died. I sat in my car for nearly an hour. I knew I had to call Margaret, but I was terrified of what she might tell me, because for the first time in my life, I began to wonder whether the family history I had trusted all these years had been built on a lie, and somewhere in the middle of that fear, another thought appeared. If Claire had discovered the truth 12 years ago, why had she waited until now to distance herself from me? Something had happened recently, something that had made the old secret dangerous again, and I knew I had to find out what it was. I called my sister the same afternoon. At first, Margaret did not answer. I tried again. This time, she picked up. I did not tell her everything I had found. I simply asked about the night our mother died. There was a long silence. Then Margaret finally told me something I had never heard before. Our mother had not died at home. She had been taken to the hospital after collapsing unexpectedly. But before the ambulance arrived, Evelyn had been there. Margaret had been there too. And so had I. The problem was that I remembered none of it. I remembered my mother being sick. I remembered waking up one morning and being told that she was gone. But I had no memory of the night before. Margaret explained that I had been only 6 years old. She had always assumed that my memories had simply disappeared because of the trauma. But there was another detail she had never told me. Before my mother died, she had given Evelyn a small envelope. She had asked Evelyn to keep it safe until I was old enough to understand. Evelyn had apparently kept that promise for decades until Claire found her. Suddenly, everything made sense. Claire had not discovered some terrible secret about me. She had discovered that I had been kept away from the truth about myself. The next morning, I went back to Evelyn's house. This time, the door was unlocked. The house was empty. Inside, everything looked as though someone had left in a hurry. There were boxes stacked against the walls. Old furniture covered with sheets, photographs scattered across the table. I began searching for anything that might explain what had happened. Eventually, I found a small wooden box. Inside was the envelope my mother had apparently given Evelyn. My name was written on it. My hands were shaking when I opened it. The letter was written by my mother. She explained that when I was born, she had been extremely ill. She had been unable to care for me during the first months of my life. Evelyn had helped her, but the story about me having another identity was not what I had feared. I had misunderstood the old letter. I was my mother's biological daughter. There had never been another family. There had never been a secret adoption. The truth was much simpler and somehow much more painful. My mother had been afraid that she would die before she could raise me. She had asked Evelyn to become my guardian if something happened to her. That was the secret. Not my identity. My future. My mother had believed she was going to die. She wanted Evelyn to protect me, but she also knew that my father had struggled with addiction and could not reliably care for me. So she had arranged everything quietly. The reason Evelyn disappeared after my mother's death was because my father had blamed her for interfering with the family. Margaret had eventually taken care of me. And the entire family had decided that I was too young to know the complicated details. They had hidden the truth to protect me for decades. I had believed my childhood memories were simply incomplete. Now I understood what there had been so many adults trying to protect a frightened little girl that nobody had thought about what the truth would mean when she became an adult. But one question remained. Why had Claire been so frightened? I found the answer in another envelope. It had been placed beneath the wooden box. Claire had written my name on it. Inside was a letter she had written only a few weeks earlier. She explained that she had found Evelyn after discovering the photograph in my old belongings. She had initially wanted to learn more about my childhood. Instead, she discovered the truth about my mother's final years. But there was something else. Evelyn had told Claire that my mother had left another message, one that had never reached me. Claire had found it, and that message had changed the way she saw me. Not because I had done something terrible, because she realized how much I had spent my entire life carrying without knowing it. Claire had become afraid that if she told me everything, I would start questioning my whole life. She was afraid I would feel betrayed by my family. She was afraid I would blame myself for things that had never been my fault. And most of all, she was afraid that I would discover that she had known for years and had kept it from me. That was why she stopped coming home. She was not rejecting me. She was scared. Scared of hurting me. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared that once the truth was spoken, our relationship would never be the same. I sat in Evelyn's empty house reading the letter over and over. Then I understood something I had failed to see. Claire had spent years trying to protect me in exactly the same way my mother had once tried to protect me. She had inherited the same mistake. She believed love meant carrying the difficult things alone. I drove home that evening. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel angry at my daughter. I felt heartbroken for her. She had been carrying a secret because she thought it was the kindest thing she could do. But secrets do not always protect people. Sometimes they create a distance that becomes more painful than the truth itself. The following morning, I went to Claire's apartment. I did not go there to demand answers. I did not go there to confront her. I simply wanted her to know that she no longer had to protect me. When I saw her, she looked exhausted. I could see immediately that she had been struggling with the same decision for a long time. I gave her the letter I had found. She read it. Then she began crying. It was the first time I had seen my daughter cry in years. I held her for a long time. Neither of us tried to explain everything. We simply stayed there. Later, we went through the old photographs together. She told me everything she had discovered. I learned about Evelyn. I learned about my mother's fear. I learned about the plans she had made for me. And I finally understood why so many pieces of my childhood had never made sense. There was no terrible family scandal, no hidden criminal secret. No shocking betrayal. There was something much more ordinary. Fear. Fear had shaped my mother's decisions. Fear had shaped Margaret's silence. And years later, fear had shaped Claire's distance from me. 3 generations of women had tried to protect one another. And somehow, that protection had caused all of us to hide from the truth. After that day, Claire started coming home again. Not immediately every week. Not suddenly as if nothing had happened. It took time. We had to rebuild the ease we once had. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we deliberately talked about ordinary things. Cooking. Work. Old photographs. The weather. Little things that slowly reminded us that our relationship did not have to be defined by one secret. Months later, I returned to the spare bedroom. I opened the old box where everything had started. I looked at the photograph of Claire with Evelyn. Then I looked at the photograph of my mother. For years, I had thought family secrets were about hidden facts. Now I understood that sometimes the Real secret was how much fear people could carry while believing they were doing the right thing. Claire had not stopped coming home because she stopped loving me. She had stopped coming home because she loved me so much that she was afraid to tell me the truth. And perhaps that was the lesson I needed most. Love should not require us to carry everything alone. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is trust the person we are trying to protect enough to let them know the truth. I still keep the old photograph, not because it reminds me of the secret. It reminds me of the moment when I finally understood my daughter. And every time Claire comes through my front door now, I no longer wonder whether she will stay. I simply feel grateful that she came home.